All right, so buckle up because we're diving into some serious drama this time.
Yeah.
We're talking about the kings of Israel and Judah, and let me tell you, these chapters from the books of Kings, they've got it all: family feuds, power struggles, you name it. And of course, a little divine intervention never hurts, right?
It's true. It's like Game of Thrones meets, well, the Bible. But on a serious note, it's a fascinating look at how these rulers saw their role, not just politically, but also in relation to, a higher power.
Right, it's not just about ruling a kingdom, it's about being chosen by God, about upholding that covenant. So where do we even start with all these kings? We've got Jehoahaz, then his son Jehoash takes over. Over Judah, there's Amaziah. I mean, talk about a family tree. What's the key thing to keep in mind as we try to untangle all of this?
Well, one phrase you'll see pop up again and again is, he did evil in the sight of the Lord. And that's not just about, being a good person or a bad person. It's much bigger than that. It's really about whether these kings were following the laws and the commandments that God had, laid out for them.
So their actions had much bigger implications. It wasn't just about them.
Yeah.
It affected the whole kingdom.
Exactly. It's about their legitimacy to rule, about the spiritual well-being of the entire nation. And we see this play out in so many ways: wars, famines, you name it. Remember what happened during Jehoahaz's reign?
Oh, man, he got dealt a rough hand. I mean, the Arameans were a constant threat. Didn't they absolutely decimate his army at one point?
They did, yeah. He was left with 50 horsemen and only 10 chariots? Talk about adding insult to injury.
Talk about a bad day at the office, right? But it really shows you how quickly things could fall apart if a king wasn't, right with God.
Right, and it wasn't just external threats either. It's like when you're not following the rules, things start to unravel from the inside too. It's interesting, though, because even when things looked bleak, there was always a chance for redemption.
Right, a chance to turn things around. Like with his son, Jehoash. Did he learn from his father's mistakes or?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? He comes to power after seeing what happened to his father, right?
Right.
You'd think he'd want to do things differently, and yet the text still says that he did evil in the sight of the Lord, just like his father.
So frustrating. It's like history repeating itself. Speaking of interesting rulers, though, we can't forget about King Joash. Same name, different guy, though, right? He's the one who has that incredibly moving encounter with the prophet Elisha, just as Elisha's about to die.
Oh, absolutely. That scene is powerful, yeah.
Yeah.
You've got Joash there, weeping over Elisha like a son, crying out, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." But Elisha, even though he's literally on his deathbed, he gives Joash this final task, this final lesson.
Right. He tells him to shoot arrows out the window, and each arrow represents, a victory over their enemies, the Arameans?
Exactly. And this is where it gets interesting, because Joash only shoots the arrows 3 times. And you can tell Elisha's disappointed.
He's like, come on, you had one job.
Well, it's more like he sees in that moment that Joash, despite his tears, despite his grief, he's still holding back.
Maybe he wasn't as committed to really driving out the enemy as Elisha thought. It makes you wonder, were his tears more about losing Elisha or about, I don't know, maybe facing some tough questions about his own leadership?
It's a really thought-provoking moment. And it kind of sets the stage perfectly for, this bigger conversation we need to have about these 2 kingdoms, Israel and Judah.
Okay, so we've got Israel and Judah, these 2 kingdoms, both tracing their roots back to King David. But man, are they on different paths. It's like they took sibling rivalry to a whole new level. So what caused this big split, and why should we even care?
Well, after King Solomon's reign, things got, a little messy. The kingdom fractured, with Israel in the north and Judah down south. And Judah, with Jerusalem as its capital, they held on to the Davidic dynasty, and of course the temple, a big one. So they were theoretically the guardians of the religious traditions.
And Israel. They were the rebels, huh? The black sheep of the family.
Yeah, you could say that. They went ahead and set up their own places of worship. And let me tell you, politically, they were all over the place. A new king every other week, it seemed like. And most of them, let's just say they weren't exactly winning any pious ruler awards.
Right, we talk about that whole doing evil in the sight of the Lord thing. And it wasn't just Israel, right? Even in Judah, we keep hearing about these high places. What was the deal with those? Were they these ancient drive-through shrines? For a quick sacrifice on your way to the market.
Not exactly a drive-through. Imagine local shrines or altars, often on hills, so high places make sense, right? Where people would go to, offer sacrifices, make their prayers. And while they weren't necessarily evil in and of themselves, it was more that they kind of veered away from the whole centralized worship thing that was supposed to be happening at the temple in Jerusalem.
Ah, so a bit of a turf war, too.
Yeah.
The priests in Jerusalem probably weren't exactly thrilled about people having their own little local worship spots.
Oh, absolutely. It created this constant tension between, you know, official religion and what was probably more like ingrained in the culture, or just honestly more convenient for people.
Right, right. So you've got these kings trying to juggle religious expectations, political realities, and whatever their subjects actually believed all at the same time. Sounds exhausting.
It was a tough job. And like that wasn't enough. There was this other tiny little issue they had to deal with.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. Can't believe I almost forgot. It's only the, impending threat of the Assyrian Empire breathing down their necks. Talk about stress.
Right. No kidding. We can't forget about the geopolitical situation here. Assyria was a major power, and they were definitely interested in expanding their influence.
Just a tad. So imagine, you're a king in this period. You've got family drama, religious debates, and on top of all that, you've got this massive empire with a giant army basically camped out on your doorstep. What do you do?
Well, it's interesting. We see different kings trying different strategies. Like, take King Menahem of Israel. He decided to try the whole negotiation thing, figured, hey, maybe if I pay him enough, they'll just, leave us alone.
Yeah, the old if you can't beat 'em, bribe 'em strategy. Not exactly what you call a power move, but hey, desperate times.
There was definitely a pragmatic approach. But then you have someone like Pekah, another king of Israel. He decided to take a riskier approach. He's thinking, let's team up with Aram, our neighbors, and take on Assyria together.
Ah, so he went for the classic enemy of my enemy alliance.
Yeah.
Bold move. Did it pay off?
Not so much, unfortunately. It kind of backfired spectacularly, actually. The Assyrians, well, they weren't too keen on this whole alliance thing. They ended up sweeping in and taking over a bunch of Israelite cities. It's a good reminder that even with the best intentions, sometimes things go very, very wrong.
And speaking of things going wrong, we can't forget about poor King Ahaz down in Judah. He sees this alliance forming and he panics. And then he decides to ask the Assyrian king, Tiglath-Pileser, for help. Which, yeah, that's not going to end well.
Ahaz probably thought he was being clever, playing both sides, but Tiglath-Pileser, he wasn't born yesterday, He was like, sure, I'll help you out, but it's going to cost you.
Oh, man, there's always a catch, isn't there? So what happened? What do you have to give up?
Basically, Judah became like a vassal state to Assyria. They were technically still their own kingdom, but they were basically calling the shot.
Out of the frying pan, into the fire. It seems like every move these kings made had these huge ripple effects, shaping the destinies of their kingdoms for, like, generations.
Absolutely. Every decision had consequences. And that brings us to, I think, one of the most significant events in this whole period when the northern kingdom of Israel, well, it falls.
It falls?
It falls to the Assyrians, 722 BC. The northern kingdom is conquered.
Man, a whole kingdom gone, just like that. It's hard to even wrap your head around it. It makes you think about the weight of those decisions, the ones those kings had to make.
It really does. It's like a turning point in the story. The northern kingdom, with all its, ups and downs, its internal struggles, wiped off the map. A pretty stark reminder, I'd say, of what happens when you stray too far from what's right.
And what about Judah? Did they manage to escape the Assyrian threat?
They did, yeah. For a while, anyway. But it wasn't exactly smooth sailing.
Yeah.
Imagine constantly looking over your shoulder, never quite knowing when the Assyrians might make their next move. Talk about living on the edge.
So how did they do it? Were there any kings in Judah during this whole time who managed to, really handle things well, given the circumstances, I mean?
Yeah, there are a few who stand out. Hezekiah, for example. He's remembered as one of Judah's most righteous kings. He really tried to bring the people back to God. Plus, he stood up to the Assyrians, refused to be bullied by them. In fact, he even managed to keep them from conquering Jerusalem, at least for a while.
Okay, so if you had to pick a king of the year from this period, Hezekiah would be a strong contender.
Definitely. He's like the model king, right? Trusting in God, leading with courage, all that good stuff. But even Hezekiah, he wasn't perfect. He had his moments, let's just say. Times when his pride got the better of him.
So even the good guys messed up sometimes. Makes them seem a little more human, a little more relatable, don't you think?
Totally. And that's what I love about studying history. It's not just dates and battles, It's about real people grappling with real challenges, making tough choices. It's about the human side of things.
Yeah, totally. It makes these stories come alive, all that drama, the intrigue, and yeah, maybe even some lessons we can still learn from today.
Absolutely. Because those big questions those kings faced, questions about power, about faith, about how to lead, those are still relevant today, right?
No doubt about it. They were dealing with some pretty intense stuff back then. But when you get down to it, a lot of those challenges, they're timeless. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, I think it's safe to say we've uncovered more than just a history lesson.
We've gained insights, I think, into the human heart, the struggles, the triumphs, the messy realities of leadership, and hopefully a little bit of wisdom that we can carry with us, even today.
Beautifully said. Well, folks, until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep those history books open. You never know what you might discover.
Welcome to Charlie and Mia's podcast. We're embarking on an exciting journey to read through the entire Bible in just 1 year. Every day, we dive into Scripture, exploring its meanings and how it applies to our lives today. We invite you to join us on this incredible adventure of learning and discovery. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode.